Moonshine Jesus, baby, alright. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about the new Marvel series on Disney, Echo, and want to start off with a little housekeeping. Remind you that we are brought to you by progressivechristianity.org. We encourage you to go check them out. You will find amazing resources for all your progressive Christian needs there. Also, make sure you follow us. If you're not following us already, find us on Facebook, and also follow us on all those places that you download your podcast from. And finally, the most important possibly piece of housekeeping that always needs to be done, we must make sure that you are constantly aware that this is not a spoiler-free zone. As a matter of fact, it's a spoiler-full zone, so just be prepared. If you want to watch Echo without spoilers, and I recommend that you watch it at the very least, but if you want to do it without spoilers, go ahead and just hit the pause button and come back to us after you've had a chance to catch them. Most importantly, I am joined today, as always, by my good buddy Caleb. How you doing, Caleb?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about Echo today. Mark, how are you?
Great. I am really enjoying getting together again. It felt like we were having a little bit of a break here for a while.
I know.
And that's not good at all. We don't need that to happen.
No.
But
yes,
we're back. We're back. We're being regular. We're ready to go.
Yes.
But we also have to have our drinks for the shows. Makes
that's important.
kind of sets the groundwork for doing a great show, I think. So I'm curious, what beverage have you prepared for our viewing, our listeners today?
Okay, so I think this is interesting. Because there's not necessarily a clear thing, so I'm curious to see where you go with this too, Mark.
Right.
But, so Echo Maya is Choctaw Indigenous person, and so I was looking at traditional beverages of the Choctaw people. And I found that Choctaw beer or chalk beer is one of them that was kind of medicinal and then became a beer. And so I found a brewery that had a version of chalk beer. And so that is what I am drinking today. Chalk beer. How about you, Mark?
Cool. Well, you're right. It's difficult to find. I had decided, because one of my all-time favorite Marvel characters makes a brief appearance in, I think, the first episode, Daredevil. I've always been a massive fan of Daredevil.
Fantastic,
so I just went online to see what I could find. And I found a drink called the Daredevil, and it's a nod to the actual character. And it is 3 parts bourbon, so it wins me over right there.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, if it's got
3 parts bourbon, yes.
That's the important piece of this, right? That it's 3 parts bourbon, 1 part Aperol, and 1 part grenadine. And it comes out this perfectly Daredevil color. You can't really tell. There's a couple of dark cherries in there as well.
Oh, so I can see it. Yeah, that looks good.
So cheers to you. And,
cheers, Mark.
Here's to another great show, the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we are talking about Echo, and this segment is a segment where we geek out a little bit. Mark and I are both big Marvel fans, and so we need to geek out a little bit. And then in the next segment, that's a little bit longer, we'll take a little bit of time to talk about the theo-politico aspects of the show. So Echo, if you're not familiar, is an American television miniseries created for the streaming service Disney Plus, based on Marvel Comics, featuring the character of the same name, Echo. It's the 10th television series in the MCU, produced by Marvel, and it shares some continuity with the films, and it is a spinoff of Hawkeye, which came out, I guess, about 3 years ago. Sees Maya Lopez, Echo, returning to her hometown, where she has to come to terms with her past, reconnect with her Native American roots, and embrace her family and community. So, Mark, I loved this series, and as I was watching it, your voice kept ringing in my head. And the reason is because for a long time now, Mark, you've been saying, no, we're not experiencing superhero fatigue. What we're experiencing is fatigue with sloppy writing and poor character development. Mm-hmm. And I think that this show proves how interesting characters can be when we break up familiar formulas and we lean into unique characters, because we've got here a character who's indigenous, who's deaf, with an amputated leg, who is played by an actress who's indigenous, deaf, with an amputated leg. And I was there for it. So I want to know, what do you think about this?
I'm completely with you on this. I remember, and it happened early on, that you realized, oh my gosh, they're getting this. It was somewhere in that first episode, I realized that I was sitting there smiling, not at the characters, I was smiling because I was like, they got the superhero thing right. Like, they're doing this. And I realized that there was this internal part of me that was so happy that we were getting, hey, what? Maybe
good job with this. This one was good. Yeah.
Maybe all me and Caleb talking about it, not that they listen to us at all. Maybe it had an impact.
No, of course.
There's enough of us talking about it that they finally are going, oh, maybe we should pay attention to what folks are really thinking out there. Because they really seem to get it. And they put so much effort into how they went about putting this together, and they're building great characters that we care about. They're showing us there's parts of their story that make us connect with them. These are almost all of them are vulnerable in some way rather than invincible. Gosh, it felt good, man. It felt good, right?
It did feel good. And it's amazing how quickly I can feel myself getting invested in some shows. Like it's usually like opening scenes, and I'm like, I'm there for it. And this was one of those shows where I just started watching, and just very early on, I'm like, I'm invested. I want to know what's going to happen with this character. So it's the opposite of what we talked about last week. Last week we sat there for 2.5 hours watching Rebel Moon. Well, who cares about any of these characters? In this show, I instantly cared about all of the characters. And I think it's to your point. I think it's good character development, good writing.
And it really stretches all the way back. Part of what happened during the filming of this, from what I understand, is they were planning on a Daredevil reboot that this was going to connect with in some ways. Right. And then the way they were doing it sounded silly. And they ultimately seem to have decided to go back to the Netflix when Marvel was on there. And we had the Iron Fist and Nick Cage and all of those going on. And they did these great storytelling where you learned and cared about the characters, so much so that the bad guy, Fisk, you care about him. Like that scene in the last episode when he's battling with Maya, sort of battling, and she uses her healing power and her love on him, and he's back as an adult sitting on the bed where he would listen to his father abuse his mother. Man, I was emotionally distraught, watching that. One, he's just an incredible actor, and he really just pulled that. It was perfectly played. But even the bad guy in this show, you care about, because they give you a reason to, and they give you pieces that you can identify with and feel emotionally connected to. It's just brilliant writing.
It is, and I agree. I think the performances are very good too. I think Vincent D'Onofrio, I mean, he's good in everything. He's so motivated in everything he does. But I mean, certainly as Fisk, I mean, he was one of the standout characters. I think whenever Daredevil was on Netflix, that it just instantly, I would have never thought about him playing that character, but the second I saw him, I'm like, oh, that's Fisk.
He's got this.
And I think all the actors in this did such a good job. So the other thing that I really appreciated, Mark, was the creative team here and the way that they dug into ASL, making sure that people learned ASL, and that a lot of the show was actually silent. There wasn't dialogue that was audible, and I thought that was powerful. And the way that they dug into Choctaw beliefs, and we got to see some of the accuracy. And so the thing that I think really stood out to me, Mark, is that, you know, a lot of times indigenous cultures are portrayed as a bit monolithic, and I felt like I got to know something about the uniqueness of the Choctaw Nation in this. I actually learned something. So what did you think about the way the Choctaw people were portrayed, the way they approached indigenous beliefs and thoughts? How did that come off to you?
I thought it was brilliant, but more importantly than that, I thought it was very honoring. Like it was clear that a lot of time was put into making sure that everything was done as close to what was true and what was real. Nothing was overplayed to make the average viewer feel comfortable. Nothing was underplayed to make them feel comfortable either. And there was so much detail, and we learned so much. There were things that were happening where I was thinking, why didn't I learn this in school?
Right.
Like, this is something that I should have been taught about. But I was in high school in particular, I was kind of inspired and really invested in learning about various Indian cultures. And there were things that they taught on this show, just in the dialogue and in the flashbacks, that I had no clue about. And I just kind of loved that they put that much into and invested that much in making sure. And it didn't feel preachy, though. It felt like it was important to the story, important to the characters, and it was done in a way that I wanted, to participate in it. But I learned a lot at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we needed to know about, say, Maya's connection to her ancestors, and so through that, we were exploring the Choctaw beliefs when it comes to that. I agree. I grew up about an hour outside of Oklahoma, and so very, very much in a part of the world that really should be
connected
by learning. Yeah, we should really be learning about Native peoples. And I had one unit in 4th grade about Native peoples, I think, and that was it my entire educational career or primary education career. And so I think that's one thing that is really powerful. We've talked so much about how superhero movies, when they're at their best, or superhero shows, comics, all of that, when they're at their best, they help us learn more about ourselves and the world around us. And so I think that this did. It helped me learn a lot. And so I think maybe a case in point is the Ishtaboli, the stick ball. So I didn't know anything about that, and I learned that's a way that they use to mediate conflicts between members and towns. Was there anything else that you learned from watching this about Choctaw people or indigenous folks that you didn't know before?
Yeah, well, I think there were just lots of different pieces as far as like the creation story that we get to see a little bit of. And I love that they kind of just played it out for us and didn't like have a lot of verbiage over top of it. They let us see and experience the creation story. Some of her ancestors being part of back in the West, and how they would try to protect the tribe, all the other tribes and the folks that were there, the stories that they told about that. I was unaware of those particular groups of people. So there was quite a few things for me that I was just like, that's the stuff we should have been hearing about, man. It was fascinating.
It was fascinating. And as you said, really added to the character development. I think another thing that was really interesting about this show is that Maya is kind of the adoptive niece of Fisk. And so we got to see that relationship and what that was like. And so I'm curious, Mark, do you think that Fisk really deeply cared about Maya, or do you think he just cared about like raising her to be a perfect assassin who he could manipulate? Do you think there were real feelings of care there? What do you think that relationship was really about?
I think that there was. I think it was both. He saw her maybe particularly because she was an amputee and was trying to figure out who she was in that world, and kind of connected with her as she was learning martial arts. And at first she was sort of timid, and they showed us a few moments of her being timid until he shows up and kind of encouraged her in just the right way that made her kind of realize that she was going to step up her game and really become really skilled and crafted. So I think it was both. I think that there was a part of him who was hurt as a kid, who saw her as a hurt kid. She had recently lost her mother, and he lost his father, but of course it was because of him. But he was protecting his mother in doing so. So I think there was kind of this connection that he sort of felt with her, but he definitely was looking for his own progeny who could ultimately take over this empire that he at that point was beginning to create. What did you think? Did you think it was not real at all, or?
Well, no, I thought it was real in the same way that you did. I thought that he kind of saw himself in her some, but I think the moment where he decided what her future was going to be was the moment with the ice cream man. Which I think is one of the most powerful, scary, horrific moments of this show, when the ice cream guy doesn't have the ice cream she wants, and it's kind of giving her a hard time.
And he's always making fun of her because she
right?
Can't talk, right?
Right. And so he goes and he just beats the living crap out of this guy. And then Maya comes and she sees him, and he's trying to hide it. He's going to get a new jacket and stuff. And she comes over and she kicks the guy. And I think that's where he really feels like himself in her. He sees what's going to happen. And so that moment, they advertise that where Fisk is just beating the guy in all the trailers and stuff, and you don't know what it is. And I just kind of, whenever I saw the trailers, I'm like, oh, he's slugging it out with Daredevil or something, know. So, but no, that moment was one of the moments that really stands out in the show.
It really was. It was just such a shocker. And it's this is the first TVMA that Disney has put out, and that scene is definitely the ultimate reason. That was so violent, and then to involve a child in the violence and to do it in a way that was just kind of even kill, like, not just the way we do things here. It's just unbelievable. I think my jaw literally dropped when it happened.
Yeah, I was very surprised. I was not expecting that.
No.
One other question, because I know we need to wrap up this segment, but I want to know, because we don't get a lot of shows where ASL is featured real heavily, but I mean, we've got a deaf actress who communicates by ASL, and so the people around her are using ASL to communicate. How do you think they did with that? How did that hit you when you saw that?
I thought they did an incredible job with it. And matter of fact, it's one of the things I want us to talk about in our next segment. I like how they handled it, and I thought it was very respectful, and did some positive things that we can talk about in just a few minutes, actually.
Well, I like that. That's a great segue, Mark, because we're going to end our
nice setup, sir.
Yeah, good job. Okay, let's grab a drink. Well, the teamwork, right? Let's grab a drink and come back after the drop and talk about theopolitical aspects of Echo.
Moonshine Jesus.
Welcome back. You're joining us for our Theopolitico segment. And we teased just a little bit coming into the segment. We're going to talk a little bit about ASL, but I have a question I want to go to first. And then we'll get immediately to the ASL question after that. So throughout this show, Nahulos keep messing everything. White people keep messing everything up. Mm-hmm. That can't be real, right? This is
of course not. I mean,
that doesn't happen in the real world.
No.
This is a very creative writing.
Very right. I mean, even just earlier, when we were talking about how Native history is American history. It's a part of what all we're doing, and yet we don't. So many of us don't learn anything about it, or at least, as I said, I lived an hour outside of Oklahoma and never learned anything about Native peoples. Yeah.
And that's a question I want us to get to too in this segment as well. I want us to do a little bit of a deeper dive in that. But in movies and television, it's almost always the case that the bad person is something that feels at least somewhat not white, whether it's someone with a thick foreign accent, or not American white, someone with a thick foreign accent, or someone with darker skin, or someone. What did you think about the fact that we have this great show that's doing a really bang-up job, and really frequently the person that enters in that can be seen as a bad guy, including our big bad guy, and I literally mean big bad guy.
Yeah.
Particularly in a show that is so centered around Native culture, that we get so many examples of particularly white men being the bad guy. What did you see that happening, and what were kind of your responses as it was playing out?
Yeah, so I thought that was fantastic, because you're right. Even whenever we try to get diversity in shows, a lot of times the diversity we get is, as you said, people of color being the bad guys, and there being kind of a white savior. And so I thought it was brilliant. Even this really complex character, Maya, that ultimately was good, and you could tell had been manipulated again by the big
white man
in the show. And so I think, as we're thinking about how this plays in, with the show and kind of our American history, I think that like America has this grand, terrible history of environmental racism in lots of respects, but especially towards Native peoples, as we see like the overhunting of bison, the U.S. government stealing Native American lands and giving them away. And so I think that, what we have seen in the United States is exactly that, is white people as the bad guys who have basically dwindled Native populations down to almost nothing. And I thought it was very cool in a show to see that wrestled with in a different way, and in a way that didn't feel preachy. And I really thought they did a great job with that. How about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought it was brilliant. I love that they were doing in a show that did feature natives in it, because of so much of the history of the United States, and how that kind of is a commitment to kind of reversing the story and telling it a little more truly. I just loved that. We're going to need to move on, though. I've got 3 other questions I want us to get to, and the one that we've already teased a little bit is about ASL. In frequently in movies and in shows, being deaf is presented sort of as a way to get the audience, the viewers, to feel bad for the character, like and Echo basically normalizes it, like the way her family, everyone in the family just does sign language. It's not even if they aren't deaf, they immediately have learned it. They normalize it. They don't call over attention to it. It's just part of the environment and how things are going. Reminded me a lot of the movie, if you remember, Coda. That won a couple of Oscars, actually, how that felt right and good. I'm just curious, what do you think, how important is that kind of approach in changing the way that the public approaches topics like this?
I mean, It was powerful for me, and it
Mhm.
changed some of the way that I thought about it because it was so ingrained in just what was happening, and it never felt like work. I mean, sometimes it feels
Not at
like
all.
work to sit there and it feels like they're just doing it kind of for tokenism, like, well, we need some diversity here.
Too frequently, it feels that way. Yeah,
Yeah, and so I thought that this was
but not
something
here.
that really leaned into the idea that when you're advocating for diversity, it is better if you actually embrace the diversity. You don't just put it there because, like, well, we should
Yeah,
try to, to make the deaf community feel heard or something. But when you're like,
yeah,
no, actually, people bring gifts just as they are. And
yep.
if we lean into that and if we allow them to be who they are, then that's really, we get better
Yeah.
stories, we get better writing, we get better characters. And that really resonated with me as I was sitting there. I'm like, wow, I love this character. And like, yes, she's deaf and she's differently abled, and she is incredibly capable. And the most capable person we're watching in the show. And so yeah, I really thought they did a great job with that, and it was real important. How did you perceive it?
Oh, I thought it was brilliant. I love that they made it normal. They normalized it. They were like, this is just reality. And it's not, oh, poor, pitiful her. It's not, oh, look at us. We're being great because we're doing ASL and da, da, da. No, it was just, here's the story. This is the character in this story. This is part of who they are. And so that's the reality of the environment that we create, of how everything is presented. And kind of to your point, it was just done in such a natural way, which was brilliant. And it's so important so that we don't ultimately end up misunderstanding or misrepresenting different parts of our culture. Instead, it makes it very real and accessible, and it helps, I think, us not kind of push those segments away of society away, or try or feel uncomfortable around it. I think it's so important that that type of thing is normalized so people understand it and feel comfortable around it, and that means that we have a more fully integrated culture that appreciates the gifts that each person brings, no matter what they look like.
And to your point, Mark, one of the pivotal moments was whenever Fisk gave Maya that little contact lens where
Yeah.
she could, that interpreted via
Yeah,
ASL.
put video symbols of him when he would talk, would give him fake arms to do ASL.
To do and then it translated her signs to an automated voice in his ear, and she said, to the point that, like, it's normal, right? Everyone else knows how to do this in the show,
Right.
And it's a character moment where she says, "You didn't even care enough about me to learn ASL," and so I think that speaks to, like, us as a society too, right? Like, we want, say, technology do the work for us, or something like that. And I think one of the things that it was speaking to was like, no, you got to put forth the effort to learn this, and if you really care about somebody, put forth the effort. And that was another emotional moment for me as
I
she
completely
talked
agree.
about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you brought up was just also her physical disability. So I like the show's approach on presenting people with physical disabilities. I liked that a lot. If anything, it shows Maya not only not allowing her prosthetic to limit her, but she actually uses it to her advantage. Why do you think that we still see those kinds of physical differences as only limiting?
Yeah, I think in large part it's because of the narrative that we have as a society, where we talk about only being able to do things in this one way, and that if you can't do things in that way, then you're at a disadvantage. And I also think it's fair to say that we don't see a lot of positive representations, in the same way that we often don't see people of color playing anybody but the bad guys. We also don't frequently see people with physical disabilities doing anything but being a source of, say, pity in media, and that's just not true. I mean, people are living full, wonderful lives. They're doing all kinds of incredible things and using their different abilities to live their lives in different ways. And so I think this went a really long way in showing us how it is that you don't have to be limited by your differences.
Well, and it goes even beyond just not limited. It's like the concept, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, of that it's not so much a disability. It's that you have a different type of ability, and that it can be used. It can actually be an advantage. And I think this show does a great job at repeating that over and over again. We see ASL being used as a way of communicating because other folks couldn't figure out what was going on. And so I think her cousin warns her using ASL that she needs to get out. It's using what people try to label as a disability and shun people over or see them less as an advantage. And the same thing, she uses her prosthetic actually at one point as a weapon. Like it's using it as a way of showing. And in the US, we do a horrible job at understanding all this. I mean, the Americans with Disabilities Act happened over 30 years ago. Society, though, still ends up limiting how various physical disabilities can participate in society. Even in voting, we're not even providing in all places the best access to voting. It's just ridiculous. Companies do the minimum that they have to do to meet the requirements rather than going overboard. I mean, can you imagine if you were to go overboard, how much it expands your access to resources and what would be available to you, and the people that are being excluded who could actually be these massive, important contributions? It's a joke, and it's sad how badly we handle that. All right. I got one more that I want us to touch on.
Yes.
That I pointed to a little bit earlier after you mentioned it. One of the brilliant things in Echo is its representation that you pointed out of Native culture and history, including even in their casting. They did a brilliant job at the way that they casted this as well. Why do you think, why does Hollywood historically do such a poor job in this area? And do you think it's getting any better?
I think it's been whitewashed, obviously, for the same reasons that every other aspect of American leadership and power has been whitewashed, because, the white people want to keep white people in power. They want to hang on to power. I think that's true in the film industry too. And so I think, of course, we've historically seen whitewashing of films, and something we've become increasingly aware of over the past decade or so, about how white people have played parts that should be for people of color, where they're often portraying people of color, and often in derogatory ways. And I think that was intentional as well. But I think it's getting better a little bit. I mean, I think there's at least been awareness about it in the past few years, where it's been a part of the cultural conversation, the larger cultural conversation. However, have we seen a bunch of change? Not really. I mean, we still continue to see most of the leading roles go to white people. We see most of the big awards going to white people, even if we sometimes see some more people of color nominated. We're not seeing a lot of people of color getting awards. And so, I mean, I guess if we're talking about it getting better, it depends on what our point of
measurement of better
is, right? Yeah. What do you think? Do you think it's getting better?
I agree with you. I mean, it has a lot to do with white people wanting to stay in power. It also has a lot to do, I think, with the white people who are in power do not like anything that is embarrassing about who they've been and how they. I mean, think of folks who are unhoused and how we try to make them invisible. And in a lot of ways, I think that's what happens in Hollywood too. Is that it's a horrible part of U.S. history, a horrible part of it, and it's much easier to try emotionally to try to make natives invisible, make it disappear so we don't have to be faced with that horrible history. And in terms of, is it getting better? It's actually not. Yeah, we have Reservation Dogs, which is a great show, and also did a really wonderful job at representing the culture of natives and everything. But it's still less than 1% of the people who are on shows and films represent a Native American. And that's just absurd. And honestly, over the last 20 years, it hasn't gotten much better. It stays and hovers around. It's actually almost a 0.5% of the people that are on screen actually represent Native cultures. So, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do, So anyway, we have gone on and on. We've actually run over on this segment, but we need to go ahead and wrap it up because we don't want to miss out on our favorite segment, our Make Me Look Stupid segment. So we'll catch you all after this drop.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. Thanks for hanging out with us while we've been talking about Echo. We're entering our final segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment. And I've decided I don't think I have ever been a benevolent co-host before, Mark, like you so often are to me. So I'm going to try it. I'm going to try some benevolence and see how it looks on me. Yeah, see if it fits. So I will let you go first, Mark. I will let you ask the first question.
Well, all right. Well, I wasn't expecting that. I had questions lined up. I was like, well, I'm going to see what he asked. And based on what he asked, I will angle it. So I have 4 questions, 2 about Echo, 2 about Fisk. So I'm gonna have you help me pick. I'm going to pick a number.
Are we going to play a game?
Yes. Yeah, we're going to play a game.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what the numbers are, but I'm going to assign a 1 or 2 to Echo and a 1 or a 2 to Fisk. So that'll narrow in on which style of question and which character we're going to ask about. And then we'll do the same thing with the question. So you pick 1 or 2.
Okay, 2.
Okay, so we're going with Fisk. And I've got 2 questions on Fisk. And I'm honestly quite curious of your responses on either of these. And so I've got them now numbered. So pick 1 or 2 again.
Oh, I'm going to go with 1 this time.
Okay, 1. So the question is, did Maya heal some of Fisk's rage in that final fight scene? And why did he end up basically running away right after that happened?
Yeah, I don't think that she actually ended up healing any of his rage because Fisk is so, I mean, his whole persona, I think, is built on the rage that he has built up over time. I think instead, what she caused him to do was to see his vulnerability. I think one of the ways that he is able to be so fierce is because he tries to bury that vulnerability down. Even as he talks about it on the surface, it's always in a controlled way as a tool for manipulation. Say, whenever he was trying to convince Maya to come back to New York with him and it showed her the hammer and that he killed his dad with. I mean, he wasn't really dealing with the vulnerability. He was using that as a tool to manipulate her into action. And so I think what she caused him to do was to see that. And I think he ran away scared because he had to relive that experience outside of his own narrative control. And I think that that's something that is true in this. And I think it's something that's true for all of us, that we like to control our places of vulnerability. Even people who talk about them, openly, because some people do, some people don't, right? We all have different ways of dealing with that. But a lot of times when we talk about those openly, it's in a very controlled kind of narrative where we can control our vulnerability. And when we're forced to do that in a way that is outside of our comfort zone, that can be really tough. And it can be something that you might be able to embrace or you might have to run away from. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
How about you?
I agree with that. I also think that he realized that moment she took him back to, which was just before he was going to go kill his dad. I think he realized that prior to that, he was a scared person. And after that, he was a person that was in control of his life. And it felt like she was trying to make him a scared person again. And that he pushed that away in that kind of mental back and forth that they were having. So I think it was part of him also recognizing there was a moment in his life where he, in his mind, claimed his life for himself, that he was living as a scared person. And that all of a sudden he chose not to be scared anymore and started being the person who was in charge of everything that he did. And it brought him to where he was, and he was scared it was all going to get taken away. So I think that was also part of what happened in that moment. And that he was like, but it scared him enough that he didn't fight back, which is what he had learned is where his power is. He got scared enough that he hightailed it out of there, which I think is interesting in terms of what that's going to mean about the dynamic between the two of them going forward. It should be really fascinating. All right, sir. That was my question. I'm curious to see where you're going to go.
Well, wait, before I ask, I kind of want to know what the other 3 questions were, Mark. Can you tell me what the other questions were? Let's go with that.
Absolutely. And if you feel like answering any of them, the second Kingpin question was, and this is, I think, a problem with Marvel in general.
Yeah.
Can Kingpin, when you think back to the Netflix shows, because he was in several of the shows, and in seasons, I think 1 and 2 in Daredevil, he loses to him. And one of the other seasons, he loses to one of the other heroes. In this season, he basically loses to Maya.
Yeah.
Can Kingpin keep losing and remain a threat in the eyes of viewers? I mean, are they setting him up to be so weak that we don't care he's not threatening anymore?
They just have to have him kill one of the heroes. I think one of the things that's threatening about Kingpin, and this is the danger of me trying to answer, is I'll go on and on. I think one of the dangers about Kingpin is that he's going to kill people along the way, and they might be people you care about, even if it's not the heroes. And I think that's why, and the emotional stakes that through his manipulation. For instance, that scene that we were talking about earlier where Maya's young and kicks the ice cream man. I think that's what makes him threatening, is you never quite know what he's going to do, what he's up to.
Yeah. So. All right. My other 2 questions were about Maya.
I'm not going to answer them.
Okay. I was very curious. I don't have an answer to this one. So who do you think killed Maya's mother? I mean, the brakes had been cut. They crashed. Dad seems to know, and he goes and extracts revenge on them by killing them. It was interesting to me that they left that so wide open and didn't answer and give us any real conclusion on that. I don't know if they're thinking that will be part of her backstory for the next season or something. It's interesting. Yeah. And then my other question and curiosity was, where do Maya's powers come from? I mean, they're clearly tied to echoes of her Choctaw lineage, but they're, the glowing feels a little removed from what ancestral power would be like in terms of the real world. And you don't see a lot of glowing powers unless you're talking about either sorcery or X-Men kind of things. So I was curious about that as well. So those were my questions. Those were the ones I was.
Those are great questions. Yes, and not only were they great questions, but I also didn't have any of those great questions throughout this podcast. I did not steal any of those.
I was really surprised again. Yeah. I felt sure that at least that one of them was going down, maybe 2.
I really need to do better this season. But I've also got to ask you a question, and so I want to know. There were lots of great quotes in this too. I love to pull out quotes that are impactful to me, and one of them is a quote from Biscuits, who I think is a really interesting character.
What a standout character, man! I can't remember what we were talking about earlier. Oh, when I said Naholos. I was like, every time I say Naholos, I can't not hear Biscuit going, not today, Naholos!
With his monster truck. Yeah. Okay, so he's quoting Chula, the grandma, and he says, Chula always says, there's nothing too broke to fix. if you want it bad enough. And so I wanted your theological perspective on this, Mark. Is that true? Is there nothing that's too broke to fix, or are there some things that you can't fix?
I think that there's not a definitive answer on that.
You just will never accept my dichotomous terms. I'm trying to give you.
There's not a definitive answer on, is there anything that's too broke to fix? But there is a definitive answer in my opinion, and I think theologically, particularly if we start moving it into the realms of people and systems and how we operate. Mm-hmm. There is certainly nothing too broken to not try to fix it. Matter of fact, we are required to try to fix it, even if we think it's so broke. Now, sometimes fixing it means getting rid of it and replacing it because it served a purpose, and we're fixing the purpose it served, not necessarily fixing the thing itself, but fixing what role it plays in society or the role a person plays in our lives or that kind of thing. But I think that out of love and out of recognizing that we all have some spark of the divine in us, that we should always at least be willing to try to fix the thing. I don't know. There could, quite possibly things are so broken that we can't fix them. I still don't think that's a reason not to try.
I love that answer. And I think that just as that applies to the systemic realities, that often applies to our relationships as well. Mm-hmm. And particularly that the thing that might be fixing that might be ending those relationships. Or allowing ourselves distance from those relationships. Absolutely. And sometimes relationships can be toxic. I mean, family members, I think that's going to be important in 2024 and this election season.
So important.
That dealing with stuff, fixing the things might look different depending on what those situations are. So, hey, this has been a lot of fun. And I have a lot more I actually want to talk about for Echo.
I think we could go on and on. I'm so excited about this series. I hate that we only got 5 episodes and that we're probably going to have to wait at least another year. Ugh. Yeah. But man, it was so good. It was so good.
Oh, we might see her some. Maybe we'll see her in Daredevil, the new Daredevil.
I think we probably will. Fisk will be in Daredevil, and because Fisk is in it, I don't think we're going to be able to. She's not going to be removed from Fisk anytime soon. So if Fisk is around, I think we're going to see Echo. I know that when that happens, we're not going to get the richness of her history and culture and family, because we're going to be focusing on another hero. And I'll miss that part, but I'll enjoy getting to still have her around and appreciate who she is. So.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I agree. I can't wait for the next season and to learn more about Echo and her character. And hopefully the second season measures up and it's just as rich of writing. And so we got to figure out what we're going to talk about next week, Mark. You have any thoughts? I
have a curiosity that might be fun to do together.
Yeah.
There's a new show that I think actually, I thought that there was a new show that was releasing that we could watch, but I don't think that it's happening for another couple of weeks. And so I think that we need to kind of recast where we're going to go here, because I was going to suggest, and I think we need to come back to this, a show called Constellation. I think
I've seen that. That sounds like it would be really good.
I think it was originally scheduled to drop in January, but for some reason got pushed back into February.
So you had another thought though.
I do have another thought that I think might work for us, and it's really more of a teenager type show, but it's been a lot of fun. I've been following it, and we're about to, I think, wrap the season up, so it should be a lot of fun. It's Percy Jackson and the Olympians. There was a movie made about it.
Yeah.
Honestly, the movie was kind of
not so great. Yes,
but the TV series on Disney Plus has done a pretty good job so far. I will be watching it and seeing how it wraps up. Anyway, I think that could be a lot of fun for us to do.
That sounds like fun. I haven't watched any of it. I remember the movie not being wonderful, but
Right.
but I haven't watched any of this series, so I can't wait to dive in and see as you finish it up. So I hope you all can take a few hours and sit down and watch Percy Jackson. It's a good watch, I hear from Mark, and so
Yes,
I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, we'll plan to see you next week on the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine